Hello, I'm Henry B. Williamson III, and I wanted to tell you about my World War II experience. I was in World War II and in the Army. I had a chance to go into the Marines, but I took advantage of a college deferral, and guess what? Later I was drafted into the U.S. Army. And I came in from the East Coast, which is where I'm from, and I took my basic training in Georgia, Macon, Georgia, which is about halfway to Atlanta on I-75. And we were given 17 weeks of infantry basic training. I was kind of a chubby teenager then. I was, 18? And I came out looking like a thermometer. I mean, they really put us through the training, and it's discipline with a capital D. But I was. My mother said, "They're not feeding you any food. They're starving you to death." I said, "Mom, that's part of the drill." And this was late '44. I got into the war in late 1944. And by the time I finished my basic training at Macon, Georgia, I was given a brief pass and went back to Boston, where I'm originally from, that area, because my mother said the expected question, "Well, you're not going overseas, are you?" And I looked her straight in the eye and I said, "Of course not. I wouldn't do that." But I was trained not to talk and sink ships. Loose talk makes sink ships. I can't even say it. But I think my dad knew that I was going. And I took a converted luxury liner over to Europe, the Ile-de-France it was called, and we actually, I'm told, had 14,000 on board that ship. And we headed for Europe. And we're all scared to death. Or some of us admitted we were scared, and others pretended they weren't. But we played a lot of blackjack cards, trying to get our mind off of everything. And we had heavy escort, particularly coming in to the European area by the RAF. They were very, very supportive. But one thing happened that is not funny. We almost got the torpedo off of a German sub, and it missed us and hit an aircraft carrier and did a lot of damage. But that same damage would have sent us to the bottom of the ocean. But that aircraft, I'll never forget looking at that. The sun was coming up, and there's this aircraft carrier with a giant gouging hole in the side. It was still afloat. But if it had hit us, we would have been down to all would have been over for us then. So that's a brief look at what getting into the war. Disembarked in England, outside of London, and we were billeted there for some time, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But we knew ultimately where we were going, and finally we got that call to cross the English Channel, which isn't really that wide. But with all the mines and all of the dangerous things that we could have been quickly eliminated, it took us 3 days across the English Channel. Now, if you're familiar with it took you 3 days. That's why. And we were escorted on an LST by the Navy, and I've never had such terrific treatment that we received from the Navy. They knew where we were going. Where we were going was to the Battle of the Bulge. That's where we were really going. And they knew that. And they gave us the best food they had on board. They gave us the best bunks and everything, and they did everything but salute us. I think I was a private first class or just a corporal at that time, so I had some rank, not very much. And through the course of the war and to the end, I rose up pretty high rank. I became a staff sergeant just before the war ended. Le Havre, which is France, and it had an awful lot of rain back at that time, so much so that it was like walking around in a giant chocolate pudding. Everything was mud, and so that was our arrival in France. That was the kickoff. And that, by the way, is when I finally joined the unit that I was assigned to. Up until then, I was just an infantry replacement. No assigned unit, nothing. So we were officially assigned to the 1st Army in France and the 69th Infantry Division. Not to be confused with the famous World War I 69th Infantry Regiment. This was a division. And our commanding general of the 69th Infantry was a 2-star Major General, General Reinhardt. And then it all unfolded from there. And everything was muddy and dirty, but then the real reality finally hit when we left. We were in bivouac in the Black Forest, and we were committed to the front lines at that point. And everything was just lip service and talking about this and this might happen and all that, until we finally reached the so-called Siegfried Line, which was populated by a bunch of pillboxes, which were German holdouts. And we suddenly, right out of the blue, we saw all these dead bodies, American bodies, enemy bodies, and they were as white as a sheet. And there's something about when you see a person like that that's dead, you know they're dead. You know they're dead. And the reality of being in combat, we've done all this preparation, we've had all this training, we've all had all of this special instruction. Finally, here's the real thing. The real thing is, this could be me in 5 seconds, quite dead. And I can't describe the fear that wells up in your body when you see the reality of what you've committed yourself to war. Up until then, it's all talk and preparation and preliminaries. This was the real thing. And we lost several buddies right then and there. Maybe a half a dozen. They were killed. Where's so and so? Well, he got killed this morning. Oh no! And you knew his family, and you knew who his sweetheart was, and it just, it was just such a fear invasion of your soul, of your body. That's the best description I can give you. And then out of that, we had to contend ourselves with all of these pillboxes full of the enemy. And there was this one pillbox that kind of became better known than many of the others. They were talk about stiff competition from the enemy. We called it the Grand Hotel. So any news on the Grand Hotel? Have you made a dent in those SOBs? No. Have you cleaned your rifle? Did you clean your rifle? Is it keeping your rifle clean? you know. It always came back to, what about the Grand Hotel? Are they still holding up in there? So that's a little color of describing our experience of going up to the front, and getting involved. That actually our initial arrival in the war was the Siegfried Line. There weren't houses everywhere. I'm sure there were, but I don't remember the houses. I remember the Siegfried Line, which identified itself with the big cones that was primarily to keep the tanks out. Tanks didn't travel very easily in that kind of environment. So the Siegfried Line is the best answer I can give you as to where did we start. Well, we started the Siegfried Line, and after that it was one village after another, which we were protected going into these small villages by tanks. Tanks would go in front of us, and we would walk behind the tanks. And they would take the majority of the small arms fire. It could have killed us. We had one guy that was so scared he shot himself in his hand, so he was taken back to the rear. And I don't say that down to him. I mean, that tells how scared you are. You shoot yourself in the hand, you won't have to do this, you know. And it was also an experience when we would capture a town, and it always involved the enemy. They would be there, maybe an officer or two, and some lower rank Germans, and it was kind of an awkward feeling. These are the guys who were just trying to kill us about 45 minutes ago. Now they're prisoners. So, and it was just being in the war, and these are German troops that had thrown in the towel, and they had other plans for us, which turned out to be the Battle of the Bulge. They wanted to resurrect the war and we didn't quit. Well, let's keep it going. So that was the Bulge. And it's hard to go back too many years, you know. It's hard to go back. Well, we suddenly became very expert foxhole diggers. We dug a lot of foxholes. We knew we've got to protect ourselves, and so there was a lot of activity in building and digging foxholes, and it was a whole new ball game. I mean, it was forget the surrender. They're back at it. Back at it. And you hear all these stories. Historically, they're recognizing the fact that a lot of Hitler's generals were very, very talented people, and they were very capable. And they apparently, when they decided to do the Bulge, they were convinced, because of this and that plan and other revelations of what they were capable of doing, they jolly well could have won World War II. But no, Hitler had other plans. He wanted to do it his way. I don't care how good that is, but that was his temperament. That was his personality. No one can do it better than I can do it. And fortunately, it was the wrong solution to winning the Bulge and World War II. And as we all know, as we're sitting here today, we won the war. Because you had a foxhole buddy. There was two in a foxhole, and talk about getting attached to someone. Like you work together every day on different projects. You can count on doing this, and you have certain separate talents, and that's what is instantly revealed in that foxhole. You're almost married to this person, and you look out for them. And if he got wounded, or even I had one buddy that got killed, I felt like I was an orphan. And and it was quite a while before I got a replacement for that foxhole buddy. It's a different deal altogether. Meanwhile, keeping yourself alive and doing the right thing. And if you were alone, you were cold. One of the biggest obstacles we had in the bulge, not just staying alive traditionally, but the weather. If you look at the records of what the weather was like during the bulge period, basically at the beginning of the bulge, which was early December. No, not early December, late December. You were absolutely freezing your tail off. It was very, very cold. We had a guy in our. We were mostly young, 19, maybe 18, but at least 19. And we had a guy in our squad who was 38. You know what we called him? The old man. At 38. 38. We used to kid him. He was regular Army. He was not a draftee like me, and he wasn't this and he wasn't that. He was regular. I'm an RA. Well, congratulations. You want to be my foxhole mate? I've got an opening. So it wasn't easy to get someone to share a foxhole with. But that became your house. You had that thing was elaborate. You had it all set up. And if we were still alive, we still got our rations, our food, which we used in combat. It was K rations, which was dry. This was not a can of Mama's chicken soup. This was either a slab of cheese, a chunk of something they called eggs, manufactured by some computer somewhere, had zero flavor. But when you get hungry, boy, I'll tell you, I don't want to tell you exactly how many I got so hungry, I said, I'm not going to eat that stuff anymore. Forget that. Strike that off the menu. Yeah, I hear you. Wait till you get hungry. You'll eat it. And he was right. I came in, okay, let me have some of that. Let me have a slab of that, whatever it's called. I'll try it. Because you got to keep your body going. As I recall, generally speaking, we were on the... I'll tell you how long we were up on the front. We were on the front so long, our clothes just, they were horrible. They smelled. They just, you couldn't stand yourself. That's how long it was before you. And then periodically, not too often, they'd pull you off the line. And they'd take you to a shower point, which was a big tent full of hot showers, real water, real soap, and they'd throw away the clothes. You get brand new clothes. or nearly new. They were clean. And then you'd get a hot meal, and then the inevitable, well, we're going back, guys. We knew what going back was. Well, first of all, we had a good tank. It was called the Sherman tank. It was a good tank. And, of course, Patton liked it because he was a tanker. But I heard stories of the giant German Tiger tank that the Germans had. It was bigger than this old building we're sitting in right now. And it scared the devil out of me. So much so that I thought I was a goner, and I took a dive down a handy hill here. Well, let's just dive down this hill and see what's down at the bottom, you know. I didn't care where it was. And I lost my rifle. I lost everything I really needed. You need a rifle and some other stuff you had. That was gone. I dropped it in the panic of having seen this Tiger tank. Tiger tank, it almost like it became like a human being. I'm going to destroy you. That's the best explanation I can give you. It was mind-boggling to be. If you ever have a chance to see a picture of a Tiger tank, I'm sure there are places you can get a picture of a Tiger tank. They were actually, technically, the German Tiger tank was far superior to our American tank. Our Sherman tank was smaller, and because if you got close enough to a Sherman tank, you wouldn't do this. Being part of the American force, you could take a regular grenade and pull the pin and drop it down that turret. Anybody inside that Sherman tank is dead. They're dead. But I wonder if that same thing would happen with a Tiger. Probably not. But it looked indestructible. It was indestructible. And our biggest fear was the German 88, which was a well-known, very effective artillery. And because the conversation focused on the fact, well, if you don't hear an 88, you're dead. It's gonna hit you. The only safe 88s are the ones you can hear. Well, that's an 88. Yeah, that's an 88. But you know what was one of the biggest shock of my life was when we were in the forest, because the Germans put a lot of burlap bags up in the trees to slow down your advance, because it looked like snipers were up there, and there were some real snipers up there, but they multiplied their sniper force by adding a few burlap bags that looked like people. But here we are on the edge of the forest, and we're all having a break. And I had occasion. I took my steel helmet off, and it seemed pretty quiet. There was no talk of any renewed advance by the enemy. It looks like we. Almost like you've won this football game, you know, you're the winner. And right out of the blue, I decided, well, I'm gonna put this back. I'm gonna put this back on. No sooner did I put that steel helmet back on, this giant blast right in the middle of us. Whoa! A mortar shell hit, and I heard this one guy scream. Took his leg off. There were only about 4 or 5 of us in this little area at the edge of the forest. And he turned that color. White as a sheet. He was, you know, the first thing he said to me, Hank, have you got a cigarette? And it wasn't long after that a medic showed up, and just pumped him full of morphine. Because he was, that's called aftershock, you know, where you almost seem to return to normal. Do you have a cigarette, Hank? Can I have a cigarette? Yeah. Okay, I'll make one. If I don't have one, I'll make one. You know? Thanks. And then the medics come in with a morphine. He'd lost his leg. That was the scream. When you lose a leg that quickly, that abruptly, that's the kind of scream you get out of it. Can't describe the scream. So it was kind of a stray mortar shell that hit that area there. But when I looked at my still helmet, I remembered I had just put this. It looked like a giant golf ball with these little knocks all the way through it. And the medic said if you had not put that helmet back on, you'd be DEAD right now, just from the shock. So it's funny how there are certain specific experiences that you remember. Toward the end of World War II, the enemy was retreating so quickly. The only way we could keep up with them was riding on top of a tank. And we'd strap ourselves on the tank because inevitably we'd fall asleep while the tank was going. We were that tired. And this one, we had ridden all night in the snow and the sleet, the cold and everything, and we come up on this rise. And that's what you put on your computer graphics. And what it was, Keith, it was this giant tent with smoke coming out of the tent, like they were cooking something. And it turned out that's exactly what it was. They were cooking a meal fit for a king. Can you think of all this garbage we've been eating up to this point simply to stay alive? And so we got, you name it, we got the best of everything. We got bacon and eggs and pancakes and orange juice and coffee. And I mean, it was like you died and gone to heaven. I thought they discontinued this kind of food. What have they done? And you put that together for me. That will be probably, if not one of the major experiences I had over food. And we ate too much. We've been starving for so long. We ate too much. But it was fantastic. Fantastic. They were coming in from all sides. Here's the enemy retreating in mass, and there's different units coming in from different areas, and it just so happened we wound up. Our 69th Infantry Division was the first American division to meet up with the Russians. And it took place in Torgau, Germany. Torgau or something. Torgau, Germany. And talk about a wild bunch. They were wild. Of course, their middle name is vodka. If they offer you a vodka, you take a vodka. You don't say no to a vodka. And this this one female Russian soldier with a machine gun on her back, she decided she wanted to give me a hug. It almost broke my rib cage. I mean, talk about an enthusiastic. And she offered me a vodka, and I knew you take the vodka, yes. And I cut it off then. I didn't want to get too palsy-walsy with her, because I to this day I think she had other plans. She had other plans. But being that this was a historical event, which it was, East meets West, and I've got a thing on my bed that'll graphically show you what this looks like. It attracted all the media, all the big name brass like Eisenhower and Patton and Bradley and some of the others. And these high-ranking generals came across this bridge, which I never saluted so much in my life. I got sick of saluting. They all came across in staff car, a regular staff car, Not Patton. Patton came across in a tank with his head on, looking over I've got a helmet back in there with 3 stars on it, with his 3 stars showing. And he was in a bad mood then because he had been promised that he would take Berlin. But the politicians pulled him back. And he was furious, absolutely furious. Because that was his private little fame. I'm going to be famous. I'm going to take Berlin. But the Germans, they were a wild bunch. They had a little game that they played. They had a minefield right here. And signs everywhere saying, be careful of the mines, they're deadly. And they had a little game. They would run through the minefield, and if you came out of the other end alive, you got some kind of a prize, That's a waste of time. We had enough opportunities to get killed. Why hunt for a new way? Get killed. But that's what led to the meeting up with the Russians, and also the being a liberator in one of the death camps, which is Buchenwald, right near Berlin, and so my story is that. At 20 years old, talk about a wake-up call, seeing all these dead bodies and these people that are just hanging by threads, men, women, and children. We had to take a whole trainload of them to another city. And the first thing we were told, don't try to feed these people. Not like the tent up on the hill, like we were not that far gone. But don't feed these people any regular food, it'll kill them. The digestive system would not accommodate all of this gorgeous food. So we kept them going with hot broth and soup and that type of thing. And it was hard to say no to a smiling child. Chocolat, chocolat, chocolat. Well, maybe later. It's hard to say no to them because our middle name was chocolate. Our middle name was food. Cigarettes. That was our middle names. 3: food, chocolate, and cigarettes. That was our middle name. That's what we represented to them. We had to go into the camp close enough to get the living out of there. We'd heard the stories of. But you see, we were separated from the Buchenwalds and the other death camp. We were in World War II, and we were busy staying alive and all that kind of thing. We'd heard stories about what's going on, but we didn't really get a taste of the real thing. And Eisenhower was offered, well, we have photographs for you, General Eisenhower. I don't want photographs. I want to go there. And he took Patton with him, and he took Bradley with him, and some other high-ranking officers. They wanted to see a death camp. And the stories went around that, well, even the Germans didn't know what was going on, which I think is a lot of baloney. But Patton, he took a whole village full of people. it was an order. You're going through this death camp. You're going to see what's been going on right behind your back. Now, whether or not they knew about it, that's, you can talk about that forever. But the reality was there, and this they showed us when we went through the Holocaust Museum in Washington. When we finally got there, we were asked to remember the Holocaust. It was all paid for by the museum. They paid to get us to Washington. But showed us one picture of the emaciated, starving, on the verge of dying people in a group, and sticking out in the middle is one former German guard pretending he's dying, and he looked so healthy. He stood out like a sore thumb. He was hiding in his he was hiding what he was doing to people, and then he pretended to be. Oh, I'm a prisoner. Don't you think? Don't I look like a prisoner? No, pal, you don't. But suddenly they were good guys. We were wearing white hats. People pretend anything to avoid death. And especially after the war was over, it was very common to see Germans eating out of a garbage can. Eating out of a garbage can. And you mentioned the devastation. The cities were just a mass of ruins. You saw staircases all over the place, but no buildings to go with it. You want to see a staircase by itself? Yeah, it's a staircase. And when the war was finally over, I didn't have enough points to come home. I had to stay in longer to get more points to come back to the United States. And I had been in the infantry all during the war, and after the war was over, they shipped a lot of us. I went to an ordnance outfit, and I became the supply sergeant. A supply sergeant. And that was in a city called Kassel, Germany. I think it's Kassel, or so, I don't know the correct spelling. But that was Kassel, Germany, which was heavily bombed by the RAF. And there's a lot of lingering elements when a city is destroyed. Not just the obvious thing that you can see, the building is gone, this is destroyed, but a lot of the bad things remain, like rats. They love to live in ruins. Rats. You see a rat almost the size of rascal. On VE Day, I was digging in another foxhole. And someone said, "Come on, Hank, the war is over." "Yeah, sure, grab that shovel over there and help me with this, will you?" No, it's over. I couldn't believe it, it's over. And that was May 8th, 1945. That's VE Day, Victory in Europe. And I didn't get out of Europe until I was probably over there for a couple of months, at least a couple, maybe longer. And that's when I felt the impact of the German recovery was starting, and it was brutally bad. the things they would do to stay. That's when the black market started to come alive. You have cigarettes? You're a rich man if you have a whole pack of cigarettes. That's back when we'd get a whole carton of cigarettes, Keith, for a couple of bucks. Whole carton. I think that if it wasn't for the military, I wouldn't have never smoked at all. But your cigarette almost becomes your friend. Something that's warm and it feels good. Yeah. So I was called back into the service, active duty during the Korean War, and I was sent back to Europe because it was a psychological warfare unit. And it would be broadcast behind the Iron Curtain then. And we weren't doing that. We were dropping leaflets or interrogating indigenous personnel and that sort of thing. And that's when I was promoted to my final rank of I was in E7. And but we were there. We were there for a year. We were stationed outside of Heidelberg. And some of our work was what you'd call cloak and dagger. We'd wear civilian clothes to go to some major city and talk to some more people or arrange for this broadcast or that type of thing. So they tried to, the final chapter was they tried to get me to stay in the Army, and they were going to send me to officer school to become an officer. But by then, being in the service for 2 wars, I had had enough, and my choice was to thanks, but no thanks. But you look back at a lot of these, I never would have met you, Brad, never would have known Chris or nothing. Your whole life would have been different. There would have been good parts of that and bad parts. But it's tough to get military out of your system. Plus, I went to military school before I was drafted into the Army, so I had enough uniform. I think you'll have to. I think you'll have to go all the way back to the Civil War, where there's any major local damage or local evidence of some kind of a war going on. And we know what kind of a war the Civil War was. There's none like it. But I came back to the United States. I was separated at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. And I was in New York, and I got the ruptured duck that had to tell everybody you're out, And the overall impression was everything seemed to be peachy perfect. Did anybody get hit here? Is any destruction here? You want the destruction details of these places in Europe in World War II, in the thick of it. But it looked like the United States hadn't even been touched. And somehow people had the attitude that pat you on the back. Well, how was that World War II? Was it okay for you? Like you went to a movie. There was no reality at this end of what happened over there. It was just, and there are continuing stories about the Holocaust. That never happened. Those death camps, no. And there's a book that I bought at the Holocaust Museum about that. It's called "The World Must Know," because there's giant pictures in there and everything, the details of all that. Yeah. I mean, if someone asked me to describe what I thought of the Holocaust Museum, I said there's no way to describe it. The only description I can give you is it was terrific, terrible. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Here's a big, giant room, table, shoes on top of this table. Big shoes, medium shoes, small shoes. People. I mean, it was tough. Tough to take that. And probably some people would elect, well, I'd rather not go in there. And one thing before there were I think 120 of us, Keith, who were liberators of some death camp. And General Petraeus, who was there, he had 4 stars on his shoulder and medal. He ran out of uniform. His medals went down to his shoes almost. And he said to his aide, who was a full colonel, he said, I want to shake hands with every one of those guys before they go into the museum. I want every hand. And he shook my hand like no one's ever shook my hand before. Thank you so much for what you did. It wasn't just boom, 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 boom. I'm going to shake hands with every one of those guys before they go into the Holocaust Museum. And then at lunch, they had these big round tables, Keith, inhabited by liberators like ourselves, survivors, military, and the media at each table was represented. And we were given a big surprise at that luncheon. Our speaker was General Dwight Eisenhower's granddaughter, and I had my picture taken with her. And she was just so great. About her comments and everything was so professional. And but Eisenhower was the one. He didn't want pictures of the death camps. He wanted to go there. Want to go. Sometimes you hear enough stories, you want to know the real thing. Okay. So I've got a plane waiting. We're going to fly over to Berlin as soon as we're finished here today. Okay. Well, I knew the first thing I had to reveal, and which I'll reveal right now. I forgot to mention when I went to that death camp and saw those faces of people dying, hungry, hurting. At 20 years old, which I was, April 1945, I was 20 years old. A typical 20-year-old male is usually pretty satisfied with himself. So basically, I was stuck on myself, okay? And I owe everything is me, 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 which the world continues to do today. But when those faces, when I could look in their eyes and see that they were thinking, finally, here's some people that are going to help us. Really going to help us. No more starvation, no more torture, no more gas chambers. That spotlight went from me to them. And that's how it changed my whole life. I forget about Hank. What about them? What is your thinking about them, pal? And so one of the early things that I wanted to establish with Dave Short and his group over there, and even at Wright State Medical School, and we were asked to speak to the medical students over there, because they were taking a course called Nazi medicine. And Nazi medicine boiled down to Hitler's desire to create the perfect German. Your hair is not blonde enough. Your eyes are not blue enough. Get out of here. I don't want you. And he affected thousands of people and labeled them unacceptable. They didn't look right. They weren't. I didn't like that personality. They weren't the perfect German. But one thing I wanted to establish early in all of these is because a frequent question could be, Keith, were you scared? Were you scared when you were doing this? You bet I was scared. I was 19. I was scared when I first got my first taste of the war, and I actually felt guilty for being scared. And I went to I had a first lieutenant platoon commander. He was a West Pointer. Talk about a professional. I went to him and I said, "Sir, I've got to confess something to you. I actually feel guilty. I feel guilty for being scared." You know what his reply was? "Are you kidding? That's what keeps us alive. Get out of here." Like we're all scared. You think you have a private little fear commitment here? But that's how a 19-year-old thinks, you know. He was scared too. And he left us. He was a first lieutenant, and he saved more lives than Carter has pills. And he left us, and it wasn't 2 months later, the war was still going on. He was already promoted to major. He was a major. "Everything all right, sir? We miss you, sir." I never saw that man sleep. We were so tired. I remember sleeping when I was on an all-night march. I was dreaming while I was walking. And we had this old guy that was there with us. He had no rank on his uniform or anything, which they discouraged anyway because they didn't want the enemy picking off a high-ranking officer. And we were complaining, and everything was wrong. Who's running this show? I mean, it's terrible. Who thought this up? A couple of days later, we saw him with his lieutenant colonel insignia on his uniform. You know what his reply was? "Well, men, everything okay now, men?" "Yes, sir, absolutely, it's perfect." But he was incognito. He was. Well, it's got to be labeled mental therapy. Because when I first got back here, I told you how peachy perfect everything was in the United States, including the people. There's that transition period. You might be totally healthy. I received some shrapnel wounds on one of my legs, but I was basically in pretty good shape when I got back in the United States, compared to others that got killed or like the guy whose leg was blown off. So there has to be some mental therapy. The brain has got to come back in to the right gear. The truth of the matter is, to give you an example of that, I finished one semester of pre-med in a pretty prestigious college. I was going to be a doctor, Keith. But when I came back, everything was peachy perfect. I made a big mistake. I had to get back in the classroom. And they were packed solid because of the GI Bill. Everybody was getting a free education. And but I had to, I literally struggled to get B's and C's. And I found out sooner than later that I'm not going to get into medical school. I'm not going to make the grade. And that was a tough pill to swallow. I did. My brain was still over there in Kassel. My brain was still over there in Buchenwald. It was still there, you know. And it always rubbed me the wrong way with people, and this is nothing against them. Well, how was that war, you know? Did you have fun over there? I mean, whoa. You can't transmit the experience. It's like any other experience you have in your life. You can only go so far and tell them what happened and what your reaction was to this, and that's it. So that's what happened to me. That's the price I paid.